I'm going to show you how to make your first tape loop as part of the assembly process for the Janky. Before we get started, you're going to need to find yourself some tools. You're going to need some anti-static tweezers like these. You're going to need something that you can cut cassette tape with. I'm just going to use these snips. You're going to need something to stick the cassette tape together with. I'm using this 1/8 inch splicing tape. You can find this stuff online. It's tape that's specifically designed for splicing cassette tape. But if you don't want to buy this because it can be a bit expensive, then you can just use ordinary sellotape or Scotch tape, and I'll show you how to do that. And then lastly, we need some actual cassette tape to put in the machine. So I like using these C10 computer cassettes. What I do is I basically reel all the cassette tape onto one of the reels. So here it's on the right hand reel, and then I cut the leader, basically this bit of tape up here, I just cut that with the snips, and I just take this reel out. And usually you can get at that by just taking the screws out in the cassette shell. I've got one here that I've done earlier. So you can see that I've just basically got the cassette tape here on the reel, and there it is. The reason why I use these these C10 computer cassettes is because the tape that's in them is very thick, and the coating is very very high quality. So it's very resistant to being fed over the heads over and over, and so you tend to find that your loops last a lot longer. If you get the kind of cassette tape that you find in ordinary audio cassettes, it tends to be a lot stretchier and a lot thinner. And I find that those loops are much more prone to jamming. They're much more prone to shredding, and just basically just don't last anywhere near as long as these loops. So it makes a big difference. So I like to use these. For your first loop, you can just use ordinary audio cassette tape if you want to. It will work perfectly fine. You'll find the loops aren't as reliable, but we can always put a better quality loop in later. So to get started, we need to just lift the lid of the enclosure away, and just remember that there is some wires still attached to this. You'll see the ribbon cable and the headlong cable attached there. What you can do is just kind of lift the lid away and just kind of like lean it up vertically like that against the end of the enclosure. And then what we need is we need a couple of reels that we're actually going to put in this machine. We make these custom reels that we use in our Jankys. You can also just take reels out of these C10 computer cassettes. You need to cut away any excess tape that's on them, but then they'll quite happily sit in these machines and can be used. But I'm gonna use these ones. The reels, they obviously quite happily just sit over the rims around the spindles from the tape machine there, just one on each side. But what we're going to do is we're going to take the right-hand reel away for the time being, and that's where we're going to put our reel with our cassette tape on. So you need to make sure you get this tape the correct way around. The cassette tape is only it's only coated with ferrous coating on one side. So if you get the cassette tape in the machine the wrong side, the heads will be reading the wrong side of the tape, and then you're not going to get any audio. So you need to make sure this goes in the right way. It should go in the way so that the tape, as it curls, because it's been on the reel, it will kind of naturally curl one direction. It curls inwards around the machine like that. So you can see here that the tape is kind of coming off the reel in this direction and kind of bending around. So what we're going to do is just take the end of this tape, and we're going to feed it past the first tape guide that's down here at the lower right edge, and it's just going to go between the rollers and the pillar that's got the guide topper attached. So we just feed that through. Can be a little bit tricky. It can help to just kind of grab the tape from the other side with the tweezers. There we go. You can see there that the tape's now coming through. And all we do is we're just going to pull this all the way up to the other side and feed it through past the tape guide at the other side in the exact same way. There we go. So you should see that that's just kind of poking out of the top of the machine there now. Okay. Right, you need to make sure that this head is disengaged. So just press the eject button, just make sure that that head isn't engaged. And we're going to bring the cassette tape down, and we're going to feed it over this black guide here and over this over the pinch roller here, and down past this reel. So currently the cassette tape goes off of this reel, around both of these tape guides, down past this reed head and over the pinch roller. Now we need to get the cassette tape around this reel, so we're just going to feed the cassette tape past this reel here. We can lift this reel away temporarily, it makes it a little bit easier. And then we're going to feed the tape past the guide that's under this guide topper here. It's going to go around it like that. So we need to grab the end of this and just try and feed that behind that tape guide. Again, it can be very fiddly and tricky. There it is, it comes out the other side. I'll just grab it with those and pull it through. And as we do, we'll just reseat that reel on there. So I'm just going to pull a good length of this along here, out past this reel. And what I'm then going to do is, while kind of pulling this firm, I'm going to engage this head. And you should find that that adds a lot of resistance to the tape now. It's not so easy to pull it through the machine, so we can kind of pull it tight like that. So what I'm then going to do is I'm going to take my snips, I'm going to pull this tape up against this pillar here so that you get a tight taut bit of tape across here, and then I'm going to take the snips, I'm going to, on this bit of tape that we've pulled around, not the tape that's coming off of the reel here, but this tape that's come all the way around, we're going to put the snips up against the seam between the head mount and the transport mount, and we're just going to snip the tape at that point vertically. So we should get a nice clean cut, and you get this bit of tape left here. So that tape has now come off of this reel, past both tape guides, down here past the head, through the pinch roller, which is now engaged, over this left-hand reel, around this tape guide, and then down the left-hand side of this reel, and it terminates here, so that it kind of roughly lines up with this seam that's between the transport mount and the head mount. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to take the snips again, and we're just going to cut the exact same place, this seam between the transport mount and the head mount, but the other piece of tape. So this tape that's coming off of the reel here. So I'm just going to do that. You want to be careful to not damage the tape when you do this, and not get a very nice clean vertical cut. So I can now lift this right hand reel away, and we should be left with cassette tape that's coming out of this tape guide here, and then it goes all the way around the machine and back here, and there's obviously a point here where we need to splice this cassette tape together. So to do that, we're just going to eject the head. Then I'm just going to pull this tape through the machine like this, just so that the tape's kind of roughly in this kind of area. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use some splicing tape to stick these two ends together. Now the way I like to do this is I like to take this left-hand reel away as well, just to get more tape to work with. You have to be very careful not to do any damage to the tape. Just take that reel out, and make sure that you don't get the tape all twisted or anything like that while you're at it as well. We don't want twisted tape. And then it just gives me a lot more tape to work with, so I can kind of maneuver the tape around, because this is probably the trickiest bit, is getting a clean splice between these two pieces. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to use this splicing tape. I'll just quickly show you how to do this. If you've got something like Scotch tape, then what we're going to do is basically take a piece of tape and just kind of stick the tape between these two ends here to make one complete loop. If you've just got this kind of tape, then what you need to do is cut a piece of this away that's not wider than the 1/8 inch cassette tape. So it takes a bit of practice if you're using this stuff. You basically just need to kind of like, let's say I just take that away. You need to kind of cut a strip of this off of here. So you kind of like make a cut like that, and then kind of cut a piece away like this, So if you can see there, it's a bit hard to see on camera, but you should be able to just kind of make out that I've now got a thin strip of sellotape on the end of these snips here, and I can take the tweezers to grab that, and then you can use that this piece that's on the tweezers to stick the cassette tape together. I'm not going to use this. The reason is that it's tricky to get this right when you're using sellotape. When you get it right, it does work perfectly fine, but I like using tape that I know is already the correct width. So I'm just going to I'm going to discard that. One thing to note is that when you're working with either the Scotch tape, sellotape, or this splicing tape, is to avoid touching the adhesive with your skin. You never want to touch the sticky side of the tape with your skin, because it's gonna stick loads of like bits of dead skin and grit and oil and stuff to the adhesive, and then the adhesive isn't going to stick to the tape. So that's why I was picking it up with the tweezers, is to keep the adhesive nice and clean. So now I'm just going to cut a piece of this splicing tape. I'm just going to kind of peel it back like this and trim the end off. I always manage to damage the end of the splicing tape when I do this, so I'm just going to cut a piece of that away, and then I'm going to take a decent length of this and just cut a piece away like that. And again, I'm going to try my hardest to not touch that adhesive. So I'm going to take my tweezers and just take hold of it like that, and then what we want to do is make sure that we get the sticky tape on the correct side of this tape, because obviously we could stick it on this side or we could stick it on that side, but what we want is for the tape to be on the side that doesn't see the heads, right? It wants to be on the side that's facing away from the heads. So we need to make sure that that's the side that we stick it to, so it's the inside edge of this tape. So what I'm going to do is just, I'm going to start with the top one actually. I'm just going to fold this over to the side that I'm putting the tape on and hold it down with my finger, and using the tweezers I'm just going to try and maneuver the tape into place. And just don't be afraid to kind of take your time and just keep trying to reseat it and just get that tape in just the right place. And then I'm just going to roll my finger over it just to tack it on. You don't need to stick it on really firmly just yet. We just need to get it stuck to that tape so that we can kind of get the two ends stuck together, and then we can apply some pressure and get all the air out of the adhesive and make sure it's a really tight seal there. But now that that's on, I'm just going to try and maneuver the other end. You can see that it's now stuck to that tape so that there's still a fair bit of it showing off at the end, and that's the bit we're going to stick to the other piece of tape. So making sure that we stick it to the correct side of the tape, I'm just going to maneuver this into position and just try and kind of hover it over the tape without actually sticking it down, to try and get the best line up I can. And then when it's roughly lined up, I'm just going to press it down like that, and I'm just going to take a quick look and make sure I'm happy with that. Yeah, it looks okay. It's a little bit more overlapped than I'd usually like. You don't want too much overlap in the tape like that. Ideally, you want it to be just jutted up against each other, but with no adhesive showing. You don't want any of the blue adhesive tape showing between the tape. If you have cassette tape and then a bit of bare exposed tape and then more cassette tape, that adhesive's going to stick to the head, so you don't want that. That's going to cause your tape to jam. So usually I go with just a very slight overlap, but I try to keep the overlap to a minimum. But you can see there that that I've got my tape stuck together. I'm just going to take the back of the tweezers. I'm just going to work all the air out of the adhesive to make sure we've got a really good connection between those two pieces of tape there. So you can just apply light pressure and just get all the air out of that adhesive. You don't want to be too rough because you don't want to damage your cassette tape while you're at it. But yeah, just make sure that tape's not going to come apart in the machine. There we go. So there's our loop. Now we just need to get the reels installed again. So I'm just going to feed the tape out this way. I'm just going to try and get the tape back around this left-hand reel. What I'm going to do is just kind of lift it into the reel like this. it can be a little tricky, and you want to be very careful that you don't damage the cassette tape with the tweezers. It can also help to kind of lift the tape out away from the reed head like this, so you've just got a little bit more tape to work with. But again, yeah, just be very careful that we don't damage anything in the process. Ah, so fiddly. There we go. Now I'm just going to make sure that that tape goes back into that the black tape guide that's on the tape player, and just inspect the tape path, make sure everything looks like it's in order, and it is, so I can re-engage that head there. And then what we can do is take our other reel that's going on the right here and just feed the cassette tape into that. And there we go, there's our tape loop. You'll find that there should be just a little bit of slack in the tape here. And what we're going to do is we're going to design head adapters to mount our heads on that press the heads into the tape and just take up some of that extra slack there. So you're going to get, you know, the correct tension in the loop, so that it's not too tight, it's not too slack, and it just contacts the heads nicely so that we get a really good, reliable loop. But at this point, all we need to do is put on some clamps here just to hold the reels in place while we work on the rest. So in order to install the reel clamps, you're going to obviously need the reel clamps themselves. You're also going to need 4 M3 8mm bolts. And what we're going to do is just take one of the reel clamps and a couple of these bolts here, and making sure that we get this the right way around. You want this side where the circular section is kind of projecting out that way. You want that facing down, because what happens is this sits over the top of the reel and holds the reel in place, so when the machine's moving around, that reel can't fall off of the spindle, right? So you want to make sure that the bolts go through from this side, right? So I'm just going to get the bolt on the Allen key like that and just push it into the mounting hole and start turning. And we should find that it just kind of feeds through the other side of the plastic just ever so slightly like that. And I'm going to do the second bolt in the same reel clamp like this. And there we go, they're both bolts are in there now. And then I'm just going to seat this over the inserts on the pillar here where it mounts, and then gently just bolt it down. And you can just firm these up. They don't need to be very, very tight. They just need to be just firm so that that clamp stays in place. You will notice that in particular, because these are 3D printed parts, there is a bit of wiggle on these parts. They're not printed 100% accurately, so you do need to make sure as you're kind of applying the bolts to these parts that the clamp doesn't move to the left or to the right and kind of impinge on the reel. You might need to use your thumb to just kind of anchor the clamp in place while you tighten it down so it doesn't twist to the right. And there we go, I'll just firm that up. And then what we want to do, once these bolts are firm, is just check that this reel is still spinning freely on here. You'll find there's a little bit of resistance in the reel that's coming from the tape machine itself, but the reel shouldn't be impinging on the clamp in any way. It shouldn't be rubbing. What you might find is, again, because of dimensional accuracy, the tolerance is not being great on 3D printed parts. There's sometimes that these parts, they aren't quite in the right place. But what you can do is you can kind of adjust these bolts, like back the bolts out very slightly and cause it to kind of angle this clamp up and down slightly and move it left and right slightly, and then tighten it down when you've got it in the right spot, just so that it doesn't rub on the reel. But I've got my printers tuned up really well for printing these parts now, so I find that typically I can just kind of bolt them down and everything works. But I've definitely had situations in the past where I've had to kind of like, yeah, just adjust the positions of things manually in order to make everything everything fit nicely. Now that clamp's in place, I'm just going to clamp down the other reel. And so now I'm just repeating the exact same process with the other reel. With this reel, you don't need to worry quite so much about the positioning being exact. This reel doesn't spin anyway, so if it impinges a little bit, it actually doesn't really matter. Just going to tighten this down. And there we go. That's our reels in place. Last thing we need to do, just obviously making sure that none of the wiring's going to get pinched, we're going to just lift the lid back down into place like this. And there we are. That's our tape loop installed.